Okay, everyone, welcome back to CSE 391. This is now our second set of class videos, but now we're in week 3 of the quarter. I want to start us off in this video with some logistic details about how the course is running and remind us about kind of the structure. And this video will also include kind of a large hodgepodge of a bunch of commands. And I'm sorry that there's just going to be me throwing a lot of commands at you this time. I promise you we could get practice with these and you'll get used to them. But we want to show you all of these commands early so that we could do for the rest of lecture some really cool conceptual stuff about the command line. And we'll use those in our examples. But we'll get lots of practice today in our item pool questions. So I just said that agenda for these videos is logistics, some useful shell commands, and then in the next 2 videos, we'll be talking about this thing called redirection with standard in, standard out, and piping. I'll explain what all those mean. One important thing about logistics, all of the important class content week to week is in these videos and in the slides posted on the website. The live class session is for Q&A to learn more about the course content, maybe go further or deeper, or to clarify things that were confusing in these videos. The whole point of trying to get together for that live time is to have a bit of a more social learning environment, just instead of just being on your own. Remember, those are entirely optional, and I'm just using those as a chance to help clarify and show you some cool things. Don't feel pressured if someone asks a question that you don't really understand. The point here is you can kind of learn about the things that you might be able to use with this outside the course and see some cool applications. And I want to invest a lot of that time in the Q&A session for clarifying concepts and ideas we saw in the videos for this week. But don't worry if you see something that you're not quite sure about. It's not part of the core course content. The videos and the slides are the core stuff, and we always favor questions, clarifying those rather than above and beyond questions. To help us strike this balance between kind of making sure we're reviewing and clarifying and also getting to show cool and interesting things, we're going to start by asking that people pre-register questions before class. So watching the video, we ask that you watch the videos before class anyways, so you can come in ready to ask questions. But we're going to ask you to submit some questions early on. So I'll post some information on the message board about where you submit your questions, and that will really help me strike that balance in a way that I feel is more appropriate. Because I felt like last week was a lot of me just talking about random things that were cool, but not really part of kind of what I wanted you to get from our learning objectives for the week. Okay, so that's kind of one thing about the course. Just, the Q&A sessions are optional, but I still think can be helpful. Everyone starts by not knowing any of these things. I didn't know any of this stuff when I was in your position, and I only gained all of these from quite a few years of experience using these tools in practice. So it's okay if you feel like you don't know as much as I do, because I've definitely been doing this for a little while. So here now is where the rest of this video gets a little bit wonky, because I'm just going to introduce to you a ton of commands. And they're all going to be useful commands, and they all do kind of cool things. And the reason, again, that we're going to be showing so many is this will give you a really good foundation and a lot of the tools that you can use to solve a really complex set of problems once we introduce those more conceptual tools in the second and third video for today. So the first thing I want to show you is on my terminal here. I'm going to actually make this a little bit bigger. My screen got wrapped around weird, so I'm going to just go back, sign out and sign back in again, go back into CSE 391, and then clear my screen so you can see nice and pretty. So one of the actually, this is still not big enough. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. That seems better. And then we got to do the whole thing again. CV CSE 390. Okay, now clear for real. So I'm on A2 right now. Just again, that's the environment that's going to match what yours looks like. So I didn't want to use my Mac because not all of you have Macs, and this is primarily about a Linux environment. So one of the things I want to show you is on our course website, we have the files for each day. So usually I'll have a small directory with some test files or whatever I wanted to use in my demos. I always have those on the course website that you can check out. I also have the commands that I typed today in class. So you can always go back and say, well, what was that command to do that one thing? we show you that there's a really nice way of actually using the command line to download the files. So there's this command that you can just copy. It's called wget for webget. And when you run that, you pass in a URL, and it downloads whatever's at that URL to your computer. And so here, because I ran on Auto, it downloads it to Auto. But I just download the zip file. We'll learn more about zipping in a bit later. But one of the things that you'll find useful is there's an unzip command, unzip, and then lecture2.zip. And it shows that a zip file is really just an archive. It's someone put a bunch of files together into one file that's really easy to share around. And then unzipping expands it so that now you can get all of the individual files. And now you can see in my directory, there's a new lecture2 directory that has all the lecture2 files. I can ls in there and see that there's stuff there. So great. I promise you, using wget is like a way quicker way of downloading things than like going to Chrome, right-clicking Save As, navigating to wherever you want to download in the folder, etc. So it's a really nice trick. Okay, so here's going to be our hodgepodge of commands. So as a reminder, you can always use your editor of your choice to edit files. So I'm going to use Vim. You can open up fruits.txt, and this is a giant file of fruits. It has 130 lines of just fruit and fruit names. For Vim, you can move around with your arrow keys, but you can also move around with the key, some letters. So J moves down, K moves up, L moves to right, and H moves to the left. So it's all like where your right hand rests. And you can always quit with the Q, hit :Q while you're in normal mode. So that's editing in Vim. But a lot of times it's like, especially if you're using Emacs. Emacs is a little bit slower to start up because it has a lot of extra features built into it. If you just want to look at a file, it's kind of tedious if you had to like open up the whole editor to view something. So you can use this new command called cat. Cat stands for concatenate. And there used to be, when I was a student, I think it was when I was a student, ACM made really cute shirts that had like the cat command and a bunch of cats like looking through books. I have that still, I think. But yeah, anyways, there's the cat command. You hit enter, and then it just prints all of the contents of the file into the terminal. And you can scroll up and see all. So one thing to note, you can't see this, but I just scrolled up quite a bit. We are actually running out of space to scroll. So your terminal actually has a finite buffer, meaning that you can only go back so far. I set mine just at the default, which is pretty decently long. But that sometimes can run into complications if the file you just tried to cat is gigantic, right? So there are other programs that you can use other than cat to help you view large files. There's one program called more, lets you see more of a file. So more fruits.txt. And this opens up like this special like interactive program where you can press space to go down page by page. And you can press a B to go back a page or to go back. And you press just Q to quit. So that's more. More lets you see more of a file. There's another command, confusingly, called less. I say confusingly because it's not anything less than more. It's actually the exact same program as more or less, but it has just different keys for moving around. If you're a Vim person, like if you've been practicing your Vim skills, less is going to be your friend because less has the very similar key bindings to Vim. So you can use J and K to move around. In Vim, if you want to search, you use / and it's the same thing here. So if you want to search for, I don't know, strawberry, you could hit that and takes you to the next search, or the next result, and there's only one here, so that's okay. So less is actually one of the more, not that it's more popular. I don't think anyone has feelings about more versus less. I think less is what I end up using a lot more often, mostly because things like the man pages, it's like when you say man less, these actually open up in a less-like environment. So you just get used to one of them rather than the other. I cannot honestly tell you the difference why you use one over the other. Less just seems like the more popular tool. Okay, so what have we seen so far? Cat, more, and less for viewing files. Do not worry though. I still have yet 2 more commands to show you about viewing files. Sometimes you don't want to open up something as interactive as more or less. So maybe you just want to look at the first lines of a file. There's a command called head. So if you look at head.fruits.txt, it will print out the first 10 lines of the file. You can look at the man page for head, and you can see that it takes this -n parameter for the number of lines. So if you want to print out, say, the first 5 lines instead of the first 10, you can use head-n 5 fruits.txt. So this is one thing that's a little complicated. Some of the, you know how we showed you that there are flags where you pass in with these dashes and arguments which you pass in without dashes. Some flags require arguments. So this 5 is the argument for the n flag. And then fruits.txt is just the overall argument to the head program. And so now this prints out the first 5 lines. Then, if you want to look at the end of the file, instead of heads, you have tails. So you have tail fruits.txt. Thankfully, even though every command seems to have a different set of parameters, head and tail have very similar parameters. So just like head, you can say tail and -n5 fruits.txt to get the last 5 lines. Okay, 5 different programs that I showed you to view files, not counting Vim or Emacs, which lets you edit files, which also involve viewing them. So lots of ways of viewing files in the terminal. Okay, now yet another command I want to show you, one useful one if you ever want to inspect something about a file instead of looking at all of its contents. I showed you can use ls-l to do long form listing. And this will tell you how many bytes are in the file. And if you want, you can get a more human readable version with ls-lh to get human readable bytes, which is all great. But sometimes you want to know things like how many words are in the file or how many lines are in the file. And that's what the word count program's for. So WC is for word count. And you could say word count hamlet.txt, and it prints out a few numbers. So the first number it prints out is the number of lines in the file. So there are almost 4,500 lines of hamlet.txt. Then it prints out the number of words. So there's about 32,000 words in Hamlet. And then it prints out the number of bytes. And for the most part, you can think about one character being 1 byte. There are about 20, almost 200,000 characters in this hamlet.txt. Word count takes some parameters. So you can look at man-wc. It takes flags for bytes or chars or lines. So a very common one is you just want to know how many lines are in a file. So you might do word count -l for lines and then hamlet.txt, and it tells you how many lines there are. Okay, we're almost there. We have a few more commands though. So next, we're going to show you how to sort a file. So imagine I have, let's look at this fruits.txt. The fruits are in all sorts of orders. You can use the sort command to sort a file. Now notice, this prints out the file in sorted order. This does not change the file. That's kind of an important thing. It doesn't actually change fruit.txt. If I go back, you can always hit the up arrow to go back to a previous command that you've typed in. So if I do a head fruits.txt, it's still in the same order as before. But when you call sort, it prints out all the things in sorted order, which is just sometimes pretty useful when you're trying to look through a certain data set or something and you want it to be sorted order. You don't want to open up Excel or anything to sort. But yeah, important to remember it doesn't modify the file. And then I get to show you like one of my top 3 commands. It is like the coolest command that I use almost all the time. There's this command called Grep. It stands for Global Regular Expression Print. It has a esoteric name from how you used to interact with the computer in the old command line environments back in the day. But most people just refer to grep as its own thing rather than knowing that abbreviation. But grep is going to be one of the most useful commands that you'll use. So grep helps you search files for a pattern. So let me search for berry in fruits.txt. So what this does is when you say, my command here is grep berry fruits.txt, the first argument you pass in is a pattern. And that's the thing it's going to be searching for. And then the second thing you pass in is a file, and you can actually pass in many files. It'll search all of them, and it's going to print every line that contains the string berry because I searched for berry here. One thing you're probably wondering is, do I need these quotes? It turns out you don't. You can leave the quotes off. I'll do the same thing. And also, for our purposes right now, you can also use single quotes. There's technically a difference between single quotes and double quotes, but we'll get back to that later. Right now, for everything we're doing, you can treat them exactly the same. But I think it is a good practice to always quote your search string. The reason is, what if I wanted to search for Asian pear in fruits.txt? Well, this is going to cause an error because the way it reads this command, like I mentioned, grep can take multiple file names. Only the first argument that's passed in is considered the pattern. And so what this command is read at is search for Asian in the file called pear and the file called fruits.txt. And it says there's no such file named pear in my directory, and so it caused an error, but it still went on and searched fruits.txt for the word Asian. So if you want to get that whole search string, you have to put it in quotes. And so I think it's just always just better practice to just remember to quote those patterns. You never have to go back and like, oh crap, I didn't quote that, and you go add quotes in. It's just a good practice to get in there. Okay, so now here's what I want you to do. I want you, whoops, I need to go over here. I want you to practice working on a problem where you have to use a command to help you find something about a project. So suppose you're working on a project and it's in your folder in your current working directory called project, and you've been leaving a bunch of these comments with the word to do on them. They're just a bunch of to-dos. And I want to figure out how many, not how many, but where are all the to-dos in the project. So find all of the lines that have to do in them. And do, as a hint, recall in homework 1, we taught you about these things called wildcards to help you select all the files of a particular path. Oh, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and pause for a second while you try to answer this. Okay, so notice that if you saw in item pool, it does say that there are slightly different variations of solving this, but whenever you're looking to find something in a set of files, you should be thinking that you're going to be using grep. Okay, so you're going to definitely be using something involving grep here. So grep something, and then you're searching for a certain string. The string we're looking for here is to do, and the command, the files we want to look at are the project directory. Now, this isn't going to work. I can't run this command right now because I actually didn't set up a project directory in my lecture 2 files. But grep by default does not work with directories. You have to do something a little bit fancier, which we'll talk about later. It's not too complex, but it's just an extra step. But one thing you can do is you can use wildcards to talk about a set of files. So instead of referring to the project directory, you can say project/star. And what your shell is going to do is going to expand that input into all things that match project.star. And in fact, I don't think this would happen if you're doing this on Auto. I may or may not. But so a lot of times, like if you're on your Mac or something, a lot of times when you press tab, it will just auto expand that star to all the files that match it. So remember that wildcards would be really useful to get a set of a bunch of files. We'll use that quite frequently here. And so if you hit enter here, and assuming I had this directory with these files, it would go print out all of the lines that contain to do in all of the files that are in that folder, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so now what I want to show you is how to compile and run some Java programs. So now I want to show you how to compile and run Java programs from the command line. So, you can always have opened up JGrasp or anything and press the compile and run button, but you can also do it from the command line like any other program. I do want to make a note about what I'm going to show you. The way to compile and run Java programs was pretty standard for a long time, up until like a year or so ago, and they kind of changed it. So I'm actually going to teach you both the old way and the new way. Mostly because I think a lot of documentation, when you're like looking things up, will show you the old way. And even though you're going to end up using the new way, they actually end up looking really similar, so it's not that big of a deal. But it is, I'm going to stress that first, what I'm going to show you right now is actually not going to work on Atu. But if you're on a different version of Java on your local machine, or you work somewhere else that's not on Atu, it might be the way you compile it. So the old way, I'm going to preface that, the old way is you have to run 2 programs to compile and then to run your Java program. So you start by compiling. And to compile, use the javac command. So javac, and then a name of a file. So I'll show you here. I'll actually open in Vim. I have this little hello world.java, which is just a really simple program that prints some stuff out to system.out, and it also makes a scanner to system.in to get some user input and prints those as well. So you would say javac hello world.java. And this compiles the program. And now if I ls, there's now this new file here called hello world.class, which is like the compiled version of your Java program. And then what you used to do is you used to just type Java and then the name of the class, not the file and not the class file. You would just say Java hello world and then hit enter and it would run. But now this doesn't work anymore. The old way is broken. So I'm going to clear this, but it's important to know because you'll see a lot of documentation that shows you that. And I do want you to remember that in the background, there's always the step of first compiling and then running. Same thing in 351 when you're using C. You compile your program and then you run it. So it's not abnormal to see those 2 different steps. But nowadays, what Java has since Java 11 is you just run the Java command, the one to run, and you could just pass in a single Java file, and it will do both the steps of compiling and running for you. Pretty cool. So they just try to simplify things, but it really confused me when I first went to record this video, and I was like, why isn't it running this Java program? And found out that Java 11 updated a lot of stuff. So Java, name of the Java file, and it both compiles and runs now. So whenever I'm asking you questions about these things, I'll sometimes specify the old way and the new way, so we can kind of remember these, because that old way is still, I think, going to be really important to know moving forward. And because I want you to be thinking of that mental model of compiling first, then running. So Java hello world, you can type some things in. So my name is Hunter. What's my password? I'll say my password is I love dogs. Notice that we are seeing output in the terminal because the program is printing to system.out. So when you run a Java program in your terminal, system.out is, by default, the terminal output. And system.in is what I'm typing into my computer. So I'm typing in I love dogs, and it prints out, hey, Hunter, your password is I love dogs. You've been hacked. That's just what the program decided to print. What would happen if I edit this file and maybe introduce a syntax error? So maybe what if I delete this semicolon at the end? And I do Java hello world again. Well, then when it was compiling, it will end up crashing because it didn't compile. So it says compilation failed and it explains why. Okay? So now that we've seen the old way of compiling and then running, and then the new way of just doing both together in the same command, let's try a practice problem. And oops, wrong window. That was just me looking up how to use Java. So what is the command to compile all Java files in the current directory? So this could be the old world. So just compiling. How do you compile all the Java files in the current directory? I'm going to pause for 1 second and let you think through this. And I want you to try this out, and then we'll explain it afterwards. Okay, so to compile all the files, since I said it was going to be the old way, we want to use that javac command. So I want to use javac for Java compile. And then the question is, which files do I want to compile? Turns out, I didn't explicitly mention this, but if you look at the man page for javac, it takes a list of files for that last argument. So you could pass in 1 or more files to compile. Now, if you want to compile all Java files in your current directory, you could try to write them out by hand, but what if there's like a lot of them? And so usually whenever we talk about all files of some sort, we don't want you to hand specify, oh, in this directory there are these files. It usually means you might want to use a wildcard or something like that. And so I would maybe try Java C star. Now this is not going to work. If I hit enter, it says, hey, some of these files that you passed in here can't be compiled. Like it turns out it tried to pass in that hello world.class that was there before. That's a bit confusing, so let me remove that and try that again. It says, hey, there's all these like fruits.txt and hamlet.txt. Those aren't Java files. I don't know what to do with those. So if you want to compile only the Java files, remember with wildcards, you can use a pattern. So if you want to find all things that start with foo, we showed you foo star. And if you want all things that end with foo, it's star foo. You could do the same thing with file extensions. It's just part of a file name. So you could say star.java. Now this will still crash because I still have that compiler error in hello world.java. So I can go fix that. And then when I run this, it compiles all my Java files. And you can see here that I had 2 Java files, simple grep and hello world, and now I have 2 class files as well. So using those wildcards to your advantage is a huge part of using tools in command lines. So in the next 2 videos, what we're going to introduce is some concepts on how to think about chaining commands together in some way to do some cool things with this thing called redirection.